Well, thank you, Lord Kalms, for allowing us to interview you today. I'm chairman of the Campaign for an Independent Britain, as you know, and thankfully you're one of our patrons and have been so since 2012. We've just got about 2.5 months to go before a general election and a possible referendum in 2017. So it's a very interesting time to interview you about your views. You're a well-known Eurosceptic, and I suppose you're best known of all for being a highly successful businessman, having run Dixon's, retailing cameras, electrical and electronic goods, which your empire also included PC World, Currys, The Link, Dixon's Carphone, all well-known household names. You retired, I believe, from the chairmanship in 2002, and you're now the life president of that group. So a very substantial business career. You were also actively involved in politics, ending up as treasurer of the Tory party from 2001 to 3. You then entered the Lords as a Conservative peer in 2004, but you lost the whip through your own behaviour in 2009 for supporting UKIP, and you now sit, as I understand, as an independent Conservative bencher in the Lords. So that's your political career, and you also have involved yourself with many private charities and think tanks. You were a founder of Business for Sterling, a director of the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, and you've set up a number of charities of your own. So it's a very broad sphere of influence you've had in this country on business, politics and charities. Is there anything you'd like to tell me about your involvement with Business for Sterling, which would be of interest to us in this matter?
Well, in the early days when we had the first polling on Europe, I think it was Harold Wilson's time, I was enthusiastic. It did seem to me a sensible structure that brings together those disparate parts of Europe. So I was enthusiastic at that time, and remain so, because there's a lot of good thinking that went into the concept of a single market, a trading bloc, easy access to people, less control of travel, the ability to work across the borders. It was the process that started after that one began to see the doubts about some of the major issues that had to be faced by the single market. And then, of course, at that stage, when we went in, we retained sterling. I think the critical point, the moment when I had to make a decision, was when we were getting into the process of abandoning the pound for the euro. And I set up with colleagues, with Lord Leach, an organisation called Business for Sterling, which fought tooth and nail to retain the pound. Our slogan at that time was Europe yes, euro no. It was against the flood. The city, large business, was totally in the mood that this was an inevitable process, that the pound would have to go, sterling would go. And I think we managed to turn that tide. We had to lobby very hard, but eventually, I think it was the politicians were eventually persuaded that this was not the thing to do.
How did you manage that then?
I think it was by the quality of our argument and the widespread analysis. It was a quality argument. We could actually prove the dangers. And of course, if you remember, the last Prime Minister, Mr. Brown, he set up a study group, and he came to the same conclusion. So I think we had persuaded him, and he saw the danger. So, okay, we won that battle, but we started to now look at the rest of the situation, and it started to deteriorate. Europe became a vast, unelected bureaucracy. The commissioners were unelected. They were an odd collection of people, often without a background that made them justified for their appointments. And out of Europe came this vast flow of bureaucratic laws and restrictions and regulations which bypass government, or even worse, particularly because of the high standard of our British government, they were gold-plated and then imposed on the city, on business. And that was, I think, the start of the realising that this isn't necessarily such a wonderful concept.
So at that stage you thought the EU or the EEC was a good idea, did you, initially, apart from the Euro business?
The idea of a single market, a trading bloc, was very attractive.
Yes, yeah.
For me as a businessman, it means I could open up stores, I could trade, I could buy without tariff barriers, and also from a personal point of view, the fact that Europe was mingling together meant that there was less likely to be wars or disharmony, and that has proved true. Although I wouldn't, there are many other factors which have kept Europe together.
And of course, when we went in, the actual trade barriers were quite high. That, you know, they've come right down to about 1.5–2% now. But when we went in, they were relatively high, weren't they?
They were high, and then there were different rules and regulations all over the place.
All over the place, yes.
It was hard to be a multinational in Europe. Eventually we did, although I have to say that there are some countries in Europe which are still so much more regulated that the idea of a single market is a little bit of a fallacy.
Is it? Yes, I see. That's interesting. So when it comes down to it then, it is right to say that the single market, is it still useful to us, do you think?
I think the idea of a common market amongst European people who do share one culture is a good idea, but it must be kept to a non-political situation. We should be trading together, sharing certain common concepts which we all need, like NATO, sharing a whole basis of commonalities, even the concept of human rights, except the one thing we must never, ever, ever do is give up the right of the final decision by a parliament.
No,
That's
quite.
the one mistake. You cannot give up sovereignty,
No.
not 1 inch of sovereignty. We must have always, at the end of the day, the right to say, include me out.
Yes. Well, luckily we have that in the Treaty of Lisbon, which perhaps brings me to the point I'd like to get to on whether we come out or not. Now, we've been promised a referendum, as you know, by David Cameron, and we're shortly going to have a general election, so we'll find out in about 2.5 months' time whether we're likely to get that or not. Do you think that it's realistic of David Cameron to promise us a referendum in 2017?
David Cameron is the Prime Minister. You have to assume that your leadership is going to perform according to their promises. I know that history tells us that politicians very rarely deliver. But nevertheless, this is a serious issue. It's the major issue in the Prime Minister's life, this and the Islamic problems. And he has said that he believes he can come back with a workable solution with Europe. I think we've got to give him the room to do that. But if you ask me whether I have doubts, yes, massive doubts.
Yeah.
Massive. In fact, it's almost target mission impossible. But nevertheless, I think you've got to be supportive of your political leaders. You vote for them. And he's a man of qualities and principles. But I think at the end of the day, he's likely to fall below the target that would make us want to stay inside Europe.
Yes. Just to remind you what he said in his Bloomberg speech, he said he wanted less regulations, more opt-outs, more power to state parliaments and fairness, whatever that might be as far as the EU is concerned. So that's quite a high level he's pitching it at. And he's already asked about immigration, and he's been told that the free movement of people is not open to discussion. So it looks like the immigration side of things as well, which, as we know, is very important as far as the general public is concerned, is going to be blocked. So that again shows, it's unlikely that he's going to be able to bring home the bacon, as it were.
Well, those things were very vague expectations.
Yes.
I mean, let's say less regulation. What does that mean for the future? Can we cancel some of the present ones? I mean, they are a very vague list, and he is, by nature of this particular exercise, bound to keep his promises a little vague.
Yes.
I think we've just got to wait and see.
It's a vague list, but it's structured
But
quite
it's got the
highly.
right headlines.
Yes, it's got the right headlines,
And
yes.
I think it's the headlines, but I have to say it's the small print that will count.
Yes,
And
that's right.
There, I think we're likely to be. We shouldn't. We should be sceptical.
So back in 2013, The Independent quoted you as saying, if UKIP has the right policies, that's where we will go, indicating you and some other Tory supporters. I'm very disenchanted, and I won't tolerate being dragged down further into Europe without some fight. Do you think the Tories have done enough since you made that comment to satisfy you that they're going down the right line, they're putting up a fight?
Well, first of all, let me just put UKIP into position. The idea of using UKIP as a lever on the Conservative Party, I think, has worked. I think at that time, David and the Conservative Party are caught in into a split amongst themselves between the Eurosceptics and the enthusiastics. And I think the idea of encouraging the Prime Minister to take UKIP seriously, i.e. start being more proactive about the single market, has worked.
Yes.
I don't think anyone seriously believes that UKIP can be the government, but it's the government we want to take the action. If the government was proactive in this area, you wouldn't need UKIP.
No, quite. They do act as a catalyst, there's no doubt
And
about
therefore, my view and those colleagues was that we had to sacrifice ourselves and be the catalysts. So
yes, that's right.
by doing that, you know, the party wanted to withdraw the whip, which was a pretty silly thing to do, because a few years later, everybody in the Conservative Party is now, and there's a large percentage of the Conservative Party who share my view.
Yes, that's right, and a large percentage who vote UKIP at the European elections.
Exactly.
A very large percentage.
You know, if he wanted to use the same basis of getting rid of Conservative MPs or Conservative Lords, he'd be sitting there with half a dozen people around him.
Yes. Well, moving on then to the possibility of us pulling out of the EU, can I put these specific scenarios to you? If we were to put in an application under Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty and asked to be our removal be considered, we then have 2 years within which to make an agreement. If we can extend it if we wish, but we can force an agreement within 2 years and just withdraw. We could either go for a free trade arrangement, which a lot of countries already have, as you know, with the EU. We could go for the Swiss model. The Swiss are in EFTA, but they're not in the EEA, which is the European Economic Area. So they've made a lot of bilateral treaties, which have taken a long time to do. Or we could opt for the Norway option, which a lot of Eurosceptics favour. Now, they're in the European Economic Area and in EFTA, and that would make quite an easy transfer into the EFTA group, who have their own free trade agreements, and they have far less rules and regulations on them. They have their own sovereignty, but they are importantly part of the economic area, and therefore we would still be trading, as we are at the moment, with the EU. Have you thought about those particular options, and which one do you think might be the best?
Well, I haven't studied the outcome of the three different options. Certainly the Norwegian option sounds to be sound, but there is a difference. I mean, there is no parallel between the UK and these countries. The UK is the second major power in Europe. And I think we've got to look for a model which suits us absolutely.
Yeah.
We are the biggest trader in Europe, they're their biggest market. We have an enormous leverage.
Well, we have a huge trade deficit, 66 billion.
Exactly, that's
yeah.
for a start.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's one statistic. The fact is that as a market, as an importer-exporter, as an important contributor to the European concept, I think our leverage is so much that we ought to be able to do a deal which specifically suits us, which is to be close to Europe, trading bloc, but exempt from the regulation. If a bit of luck, you might even start persuading Europe that their model should be changed. That would be the best way.
Yes, yeah.
And this brings me to the major consideration that dominates my thinking, that Europe is committed to ever closer union. And if we could get those wordings eradicated, if they could commit themselves to a different model where the ever closer union is confined to trade and not to political aspects, not to the idea of trying to make everything similar and standard, but to take respect for the different countries and cultures. Ever closer union was eliminated. We're starting to make a progress. We mustn't throw the baby away with the bathwater. We've got an enormous big market here.
Oh yes, yes,
It's a sensible market. It suits people. There's a lot going for it in peace, harmony, etc. We set a very high standard which can lift up Europe. But what you can't have is a single currency from north to south. And the behaviour over Greece is just diabolical. That one could put pressure on a society, destroy the civil society, create this vast unemployment on the basis of money only, foreign money. I mean, that is an unacceptable solution.
I think everyone would agree with that. The real problem has been, of course, that it's always been a political project. It hasn't really been just an economic prospect, which we've been fed over the years.
That's right.
And therefore it seems unlikely that this ever closer political union is going to take a back seat. So whilst I entirely endorse what you say, it seems an unlikely outcome, doesn't it?
It does seem unlikely, but nevertheless, it's a major card we've got to play. And when Europe realises that we are going out, and we are the second largest economy, it might impact.
It might.
Other things will impact. The social distress caused by the single market. You have massive, uncontrollable unemployment in the south. Spain, Portugal, Greece.
Yeah.
We have real social problems emanating from the policies. So at some stage, there may be a flow back and a realisation that the great dream, rather than lose the great dream, amend the great dream. You cannot have United States of Europe. And if anyone seriously believes that, then I think they're not living in this world.
Well, that probably brings me to my next point, really, that the United States of Europe is backed by the United States of America. And it's been their policy since 1947 that it should happen and we should be part of it. And I'm just wondering whether they're not the real elephant in the room that nobody's mentioning, that the US pushed us in, or helped push us into the EEC to begin with. It was they who wanted it to happen, and we seem to get behind them and agree, because obviously to begin with, a lot of our politicians were very anti it. So I do wonder if we're not just kowtowing to the USA by staying in.
Well, the USA view is pretty simplistic. It arose from Kissinger's comment that when he wants to talk to Europe, who does he ring? And the fact is that it's very much in America's interest to have one bloc.
Yes, one bloc to deal with.
That will be cooperative.
Yes.
I think we must ignore America. It's got its own problems.
Yes,
It's got a president which is a lame duck, and whose views, in any case, are quite extraordinarily isolationist and unreliable.
Yes.
So at the moment, we can completely ignore America. I'm not saying at other times we have to not give it respect. It's the biggest economy in the world. But on this issue, I think a deaf ear is the right thing for David Cameron.
Yes, I entirely agree, but I wonder if he'll take that advice, because the Americans, of course, do put a lot of investment into this country. One has to bear that in mind, but it is our country.
They put it here for good reasons. They're not going to lose out. I mean, the concept of those products not being saleable into Europe are nonsense. I mean, they're just fantasies by those who want to continue in with the single market. The fact is that we will argue on the basis of open markets and open trade.
Yes.
In any case, if you understand business, it doesn't work on a political level. It works on a product level. If the UK produces the right products, their agents in Germany will buy them.
Yes.
You must always seem to forget this. Europe doesn't buy Scottish whiskey because it likes England. It buys Scottish whiskey because the only place you can buy it, and Toyota cars and Jaguars and everything that's made in England in technology. There's no way that stuff will not enter the European market freely. It is absolutely absurd to think that by coming out, these people with this mad 3.5 million are going to say to Toyota, we'll close down because you can't sell Toyota cars to Europe. That is the talk of the
Europhiles.
Europhiles.
Yes. And just lastly, the trade deal with the US, which is being hatched between the EU and has been hatched over the last few years, very much in secret at the moment, so we don't know quite what's going on, but we do know now that something interesting is coming out of it, that they're going to give probably multinationals, because they're the only ones that could afford to do it, the right to sue governments if they are doing things that they don't think are fair. And there is quite a worry amongst a number of people that that could result in more sort of corporate governance of states in Europe. Do you have a view on that? Do you think that is a worry and it should be looked at very closely before it goes into law?
Well, when you say you're concerned about more corporate governance in Europe, what do you quite mean by that statement?
The government of the day could be influenced too much by the international or the multinationals.
Well, the government should be influenced by the facts. And if the multinational has a good case, I think that's perfectly all right. What I am concerned about is that the governments do not monitor sufficiently closely the multinational. I think at some stage we've got to produce higher levels of standards in multinational companies. Multinational companies have got to be watched more closely than any other body. Multinational companies with their enormous powers need disciplines. We've created them in our own countries with monopolies commissions here in America and individual companies. But what we've not done is control their efforts overseas. And I believe that in a world which is smaller, getting smaller all the time, you do need to have higher standards of corporate governments, multinational corporate governments, in their overseas policies. So I think the relationship between government and corporate governments has to be watched very closely, and governments have to be encouraged to keep a close eye on globalization, as an example. Yes. I know it's slightly away from the subject,
no, not
but
at
it's all part of a changing society, a changing world.
Interesting to note also that apparently 1% of multinationals effectively own 40%. So that's an interesting statistic. So you've got a very small number of multinationals who have fingers in all these pies and actually have the ruling vote on 40% of them.
Well, then wouldn't you be very disturbed by that factor? It's outside of the discussion, but isn't that a factor that you would be concerned about?
Yes, very much so.
And just as much as you would be concerned about the growing wealth inequality.
Which is in roughly the same proportion.
Which is, exactly. So these issues of Europe are very important, but there are equally broad views that have to be taken, which I don't know if this will help, but at least it will give governments more power individually. What we've lost at the moment in our society is that the governments have lost power to something called a bureaucracy in Europe, which is unaccountable and unacceptable. It is also intellectually barren. It's a comfort zone.
Yeah.
And we don't want a comfort zone running the world.
No,
we want a challenge zone.
Reality.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you very much indeed, Lord Kalms. It's really been very interesting indeed. Thank you.
I see.